a vision. We need to be far-sighted. We have to raise awareness and be very committed to the future. We are in the present, of course. In our society, everything is about the here and now. But this is not okay, because when it comes to sustainable development, the future is a very important factor. We have to worry about future generations. And that's why we need to be able to ask the right questions. All together, all stakeholders, and this is a concept that has been with us for some time. And in order to do this, we need to be able to focus our energy and our resources on the right points. Because we really need to be fully convinced that we have to revert the current frame of mind, that is, the economic process on top of social justice, the environment. This is not the right approach. We want to say that progress and economic development are possible if we can link these factors to the well-being of people, the protection of the environment, social justice, with people at the center. So if the European context is very challenging, digital transformation, ecological transformation, and social justice as main pillars, we have to work for this to become a fact in our country, in Italy as well. So each single euro that is invested, each resource that is made available should be in line with this goal, creating well-being, creating jobs, creating gender equality, protecting the environment, focusing on people. And if we can do that, we'll be able to give more freedom and democratic development. So to make our duty. Because he's our beacon, he's helping us, he's helped us, and I'm sure he will be able to give us some useful insights. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pierluigi. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure, and I'm moved, as you said. It's a pleasure to be here. The last time we held a meeting, it was February. We were analyzing the budget for 2020, and we were at the end of February. We had to change the organization of our event because we organized a remote event. And once again, we have a remote event, but with an extraordinary participation. We have more than 600 initiatives in this festival, and the entire country has joined in this very concrete utopia, if I may say so, the Agenda 2030. as our introduction music interlude, we chose the Pastoral by Beethoven. If you are my age, at least that was my case, I discovered it with a wonderful film, Fantasia, Walt Disney's movie. And during the film, there were moments of joy, happiness and peace, and then interspersed with moments of a storm like the one we are witnessing right now. But after a storm, there will be a rainbow as a symbol of the future. So we are in the midst of such a situation, and this situation requires the commitment of us all, but especially an urgent commitment. That's why the slogan we have chosen for this festival is sustainability, it's time we acted, because sustainability has become a buzzword. Also marketing people use the term sustainability, politicians use the term a lot, but it's time we took action. We decided to start this, to open this festival, linking this event with the festival of 2019. That's why, as the title of today's event, and of course I'd like to thank all the speakers and moderators who will participate in this day, From Crisis to Recovery, Transforming Europe and Italy in the Sign of Sustainable Development. In the slides that I used in May 2019, at the eve of the election of the European Parliament, we made some points. We highlighted some guidelines that we hoped could be taken up by the European Union. And what has happened since that May has been extraordinary. The Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen, has in fact taken up many of those proposals that we put forward at the time, which were given to the attention of political forces supporting the setting up of that Commission. Also, when it comes to the approach to the method, the von der Leyen Commission wanted to mark the difference with the past. In fact, the Agenda 2030 was put at the core of their work, and all commissioners and vice presidents were given the task of taking the 17 SDGs very seriously and the targets very seriously. So the Agenda 2030 was put at the center of the so-called semester, that is the process coordinating the policies, and also the new Green Deal and many other initiatives that have been implemented over the past year. Nationally, domestically, we have carried out a very detailed, careful monitoring process on what the Italian government has done to face the crisis. In particular, we examined the 5 main decrees issued by the government, which were then converted into laws by the Parliament, as against the 17 SDGs. We analyzed more than 1,000 articles of those decrees, and we analyzed them against the Agenda 2030, and we showed that we could make such an analysis ex ante as well. And this chart shows very clearly that much attention was paid to goal number 8, labor, the attempt to decrease to curb the decrease in the income of workers, but also public administration, goal 16. Also health, many actions were taken in the area of health. And I'd like to highlight that right now Italy's data when it comes to the pandemic confirms the fact that the general public, society as a whole, has been very careful, and everybody is trying to behave very safely to reduce contagion risks. In other European countries, the figures are going up, as it was the case with us at the beginning of the year. And this should make us understand that we should continue to behave very carefully. Goal number 3, and then goal number 1, fighting poverty. We are very pleased that the proposal we put forward together with the Forum Inequalities and Diversities, that is to set up an emergency income, has been implemented by the government. That's the opportunity to reach out to many people and make them part of our welfare system and not to leave them behind. Also, this chart shows that some actions just touched upon a number of goals, including number 5, gender inequality, even though this crisis, this pandemic, has affected women and young people for the most part. But we also wanted to understand how the concept of transformative resilience can be applied to the actions that have been taken. It's interesting to note that with the Juncker Commission, this approach based on the terms vulnerability and resilience was set aside, was not given enough attention. The idea was not accepted that our societies and our economies could be hit by shocks. By contrast, the new Commission has taken up this idea, and the report published 2 weeks ago by the Commission invites the member countries to develop strategic planning based on the concept of resilience as the new compass of European policy. So against this backdrop, policies are classified whether based on the fact that they can protect, prevent, or promote, prevent shocks, prepare for shock, or transforming the country. We have more than 800 articles of the different degrees that can be interpreted along these lines. Well, most of them were aimed at protecting from shocks, which is understandable, but this is no good news, because, as our Prime Minister said, we invested 100 billion that provided some sort of cushion for a very serious situation, but we have not invested enough in prevention, in preparation, and in the transformation of our economy and our society. And here the topic of European funds becomes crucial. In May, in our report, we indicated the priorities, and also we put forward proposals: simplification of administrative procedures, rethinking the role of the state, protecting the cultural infrastructure, accelerating the digital transition, putting the health of the natural capital at the center, capitalizing on e-learning. We were very pleased, therefore, when we saw that these ideas were taken in the conclusions of the so-called Colau Committee, and also in the guidelines of the European Union, the next generation EU. I'm a bit pedantic when I talk to journalists. I always say that there is no such a thing as a recovery fund. It is in fact called next generation EU. Perhaps we're a bit reluctant, a bit resistant when it comes to using these terms, because they help us understand that this is an investment for the future and not just for the present. And there are very strong words, key words in this document that was approved by all heads of states and governments, including the Italian Prime Minister, who gave an important contribution for the drafting of such a document. The goal is to create a more sustainable, more resilient and just Europe, and the governance system, as we're going to see in a minute, of the next generation EU requires Italy to make a leap of quality. People are focusing on investment, but not enough people are focusing on a changed approach that this country needs to have in order to use that money, those funds. Now, just a few final minutes on the guidelines of the European Commission to draft a national plan for recovery and resilience. The Italian guidelines focus on recovery, but not enough on resilience. And this is a weakness that we need to come to terms with. We need to fix this. Just think of the details that the European Commission asks of all member countries when it comes to their planning, if they want to use that money. When it comes to the ecological transition, the environmental transition, we have to explain, we have to spell out how each individual project will contribute to implement that transition, and to what extent and how that investment or that reform helps in allocating 37% of the plan in fighting the climate crisis. That is, out of that 200 billion, more than 70 billion should be allocated to fight the climate crisis. That's why we cannot freely use the money for other things. We need to spell out, we have to explain in detail whether the individual projects do not harm the environment or people or inequalities, and while explaining to what extent the measures contribute to a green transition, member states have to use the new taxonomy of sustainable investment that was developed for the first time ever by the European Union. Member states have to explain how they will contribute to reaching the environmental goal for 2030, that is a cut of emissions and climate neutrality by 2050. That is, we have to explain how these goals are linked to the integrated economy and environment plan. We have to explain how we need to make reforms, and for each reform we have to indicate what kind of reform that it is, and who is going to be involved and how that reform is going to be implemented. Also, we'll have to describe how civil society is involved, which are the main hindrances, expected hindrances and expectations. And for a country for which reform is a buzzword that is very difficult to implement, this is a great challenge. Also, we have to provide detailed information on the people that will be affected by the investment, how the investment will be made, which organizations will be involved domestically and regionally for actually implementing these plans. So, as I said, a very tough challenge. Also, as regards the link between investment and the integrated environment and plan, we have to indicate which method is used to monitor the implementation of these plans. through specific indicators, and especially we will have to indicate how they are in line, how they are combined with other domestic policies. So we are also taking into consideration the initiatives based or from national money. On the 8th of October, at our last event, we will present the ASVIS report with specific and detailed analysis by sector, but also we will propose some tangible proposals at different levels. So we will meet again on the 8th of October, but the entire festival will be discussing these topics. That's why we are trying to wait a little bit to close our final report, because we want to make the most of your contributions. Thank you very much, and at this point I'll give the floor to Sister Smerilli. She will help us pondering on the ethics of sustainable development, because without shared ethics it's difficult to design a better future for everybody. Thank you. Così adesso posso.
I thank for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And by the way, I'm very happy because I'm here in person, which is privilege. May I start by telling you about an old story in the island of Easter. Different civilizations have disappeared from Earth, sometimes in just a few years, but they left archaeological ruins as a legacy. So the common thread linking together different civilizations is ecology and the damage that each civilization has made to the natural resources. Case in point is the island of Easter. Blatant deforestation in the Pacific Ocean, leading to the extinction of inhabitants due to the loss of raw materials, food and agriculture. What happened? Different clans fought against each other in an attempt to have gods on their side, but to build statues they had to carry large stones. They needed boats and wooden rails to use those boats also on the land, so they had to use up plenty of timber, of wood, and that's how the island was destroyed. So how can a group of people not see the upcoming problem? Studies and experience show that it's not cutting the last tree, but overcoming a critical threshold. People are not aware of danger because danger shows up slowly, and when you see damage, it's just too late. Caught by fear, we try to grasp all we can because we don't want to be left behind. So what's the morale of the Island of Easter story? An article was published by a famous biology in '68 entitled The Tragedy of Commons, highlighting an issue, a problem that since then has been often addressed by economists, the management of commons, of common goods, goods that are available to all, lakes, natural resources, and so on. Arden, in his article, talks about sheep. If everybody brings too many sheep to the same lawn, very soon there will be no grass to eat for them. So everybody's interest would be restricting this exploitation. But if you look at this individually, from an individual viewpoint, there is always an incentive to increase the number of sheep grazing because I get a benefit, whereas the cost is smaller because it is shared among many. No one wants to limit themselves. If I don't bring my sheep, others will. So, what's the dilemma? How can we best exploit opportunities without causing damage to others? But if everybody thinks the same way, very soon there will be no grass for sheep. This is what happens in the management of many common goods. Not everywhere, those, not always. Romson, Nobel laureate for economy, conducted empirical studies on the management of collective goods. He observed the ability to cooperate in taking care of common goods. Some problems, do we have problems with the theory that shapes economic studies? Romstrom says to explain cooperative behavior, there is trust, the trust that individuals have towards others, the investment that others make in terms of reputation, and the likelihood that participants use mutual rules. A cooperative management of common goods can happen only when users of those goods belong to a homogeneous group, trust each other, expect to share their goods with their children, and get organized to oversee those common goods. A couple of days ago, on the Po Delta, I visited a place of biodiversity where interaction between man and nature is very, very positive. Without humans, that place would be a marsh. Thanks to humans, it was turned into a beautiful place, and they grow clams there in a cooperative way. Everybody help each other. So it's like science fiction, but it is very real. The pandemic taught us that common goods are very important, and the same goes for the common good. We have come to understand that no one can make it on their own, in spite of uncertainties, in spite of what can happen, it is clear that we can only get out of this all together. The pandemic has shown that we need each other. It applies to health, economy, and the earth. The economic and production system is a collective work of cooperation. Common good is an expression that becomes more important than ever. It's not a distant notion. Too often, working for the common good was meant as doing something for others, without realizing that as I do something for collectivity, I do it for myself. In the face of collective evil, we understand as individuals that common good, the good of all, includes my own good. Even the etymology of the term common good, cum unus, cum munus. Cum means together, munus is obligation, duty, as well as gift. So common good can be experienced together. It's both a duty and a gift. Collective behaviors resulting from the healthcare emergency are a piece of common good, a duty, a burden, and a gift to ourselves and to others, and also a gift that we receive, a way to take care of each other, and we are experiencing this. On the 9th of September, Pope Francis said that the common good requires the participation of all. If no one is left behind, we can regenerate good relations at community, national, international level in harmony with the environment. This is the ethics that we need. We should all play our part because we all belong to a greater good, and that's why no one should be left behind. So what about the economy then? Economic rationality shouldn't just be based on individualism, because in that respect, common good and cooperation would be seen as an exception in economic terms. Cooperating in the management of collective goods is an exception to demonstrate because it is not envisaged by the economic theory, but there is a new proposal, the so-called collective rationality, the we rationality of us. It's an attempt to redefine cooperative behavior. We need to change the Cartesian axis used by economic models. The author of the Donut Economics wrote that we are used to think that good is right-bound and we probably have to redefine our way of thinking. So what matters is not the way you conceive the object or the consequences of your choices, but how subjects conceive themselves and others. If we were capable of seeing together with others as part of something bigger, we wouldn't have the problem of common goods. We should wonder what is best for us, not for me. That's why we have to cooperate. The crucial question is, okay, why don't we do this? How can you favor the sense of us? How can you change people's mind in organizations and society? Studies and experiments show that some features favor this way of thinking. For instance, in a given situation, you should be able to see the best possible solution, a solution that is much better than others. And also the sharing of benefits. If you suspect that working for collective good means that some become rich to the detriment of others, you won't feel the sense of us. That's why even taxation should be redefined. Regenerating by design, redistributing by design. This is the expression that we use. We need to think in new ways. We are all part of the same effort. The we rationality is a scientific attempt to change, and this attempt deserves to be explored. At the end of the day, economic science is based on the choices of individuals. Catherine Marsal wrote, if you understand the individual, you understand everything, criticizing the dominant approach in economy. Society is just a sum of individuals who interact but never meet. Interactions can change choices, but not the consciousness of the self. This oversimplification made the economic science highly attractive. It could offer simple explanations to complex issues, but at the same time, we have seen how harmful this has been. Preferences can become more social, but at the end of the day we have the utility function of individuals, new ways of reasoning, new ways of thinking, try to go beyond. It's an ambitious project. It can sound strange to many, but it can explain reality, starting from the individual in relation to others. We need to go beyond, trying to see when we can go back to normalcy. We like the term regeneration. Are we able to be up to this new vision of the common good? In 1400, businesses were seen as places and activities that must demonstrate to the collectivity they are not stealing wealth from common good. And now we see what it means. The business of the future, the economy of the future may be revisited in terms of resilience. No company should be an instrument to cause problems to others. A business should be at the service of collectivity, and collectivity should assess it in the light of its effect on the common good. We will have a fairer, juster, sustainable economy when stock indices will change according to this behavior by companies, by businesses, when the environmental effect of their action is not seen as an externality, as something that is external. And companies should engage in development projects for the collectivity, not only for their shareholders. We want to live in a world where socially esteemed people are those who daily work to take care of themselves and others. If this happens, the pandemic will gain significance, will gain a meaning. And so the efforts for sustainable development will be more important than ever. Sustainable development and the 2030 agenda are quite important. The Agreement of Paris was signed in 2015, the same year of the Laudato Si. The common thread is the ecological conversion needed because we don't want to leave anyone behind. The Pope reminds us that we need to prepare for the future and we need to prepare the future. The Pope says, be down to earth. So time has come to move from celebration to the deployment of these ambitious programs. That's why I want to thank ASVIS for what they do in this respect. Thank you. Good morning. I thank our ASVIS for asking me to take part in this event. I'm very emotional because I'm here physically. Within shortly we'll have connections with guests all over the world. RAI is a media partner of ASVIS, of the Sustainable Development Festival, and the festival opens with a new vision of Europe. Sustainability becomes the foundation of Europe. Von der Leyen talked about sustainability as the way to go to overcome this crisis. The crisis slowed down the accomplishment of some 2030 agenda objectives, but it can also be seen as an opportunity. So how to make Europe sustainable and resilient? We will discuss this with our guests. Laurence Toubiana, head of the European Climate Foundation, welcome. Thanks for being here. Francesco Starace, CEO of Enel, Mario Abreu, head of Group Sustainability of Ferrero, and Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, co-chairman of the Club of Rome. Welcome to you all. I would start with the suggestions we heard before. We talked about the impact of COVID, not only in terms of health, but also economic and social. So how can you transform this into an opportunity?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Of course.
Good morning. So thanks very much. Mario Abreu here. Th Thanks very much. I have problems in hearing. Let me say thanks very much for.
Okay, we can hear you, so just go on.
Okay. Thanks very much to the Alianza Avis for the invitation to join this panel. And congratulations for organizing this meaningful and ambitious event, especially in a year like this. So 2020 has been a year like no other, and companies like Ferrero have a very important role to provide concrete answers and examples to secure that sustainability becomes central in governance processes. Ferrero, as a family company, believes that value is created through building trust and taking responsibility for everyone that works with us and for us. These values have never been so important as now. During emergencies like this one, it's absolutely important to keep factories open, to produce food, to keep employees safe, to keep suppliers safe, and to maintain supplies flowing to the supermarkets, securing food safety for the consumers. The COVID crisis did not give us any allowance to, however, forget other important matters, like impact of climate change. In the last 8 months here at Ferrero, we have not stopped it with our work to measure our value chain carbon footprint and the impact of our activities from raw materials to the production of our products, having a clear understanding about the impact of our products across value chain is key to identify areas where we can reduce our climate emissions. We are seeing the very strong impacts of COVID right now, but we can't forget that the climate emergency requires business to step up commitments, to reduce carbon emissions, and to help limit climate change. And no industry can do it alone. No business can do it alone. It has to be a matter of collaboration for the benefit of all. At Ferrero, we're going to play our part in delivering a new set of climate commitments towards 2030. And we're going to be communicating about this quite soon as we release our annual sustainability report in a few weeks. But in the meantime, we are progressing towards our use of renewable electricity. And I understand we're going to be talking more about renewable electricity later on. Today, more than 60% of our electricity is already renewable. So responsibly sourcing materials, taking people and nature in consideration, and maintaining the quality of the ingredients is crucial to our products, is crucial to stakeholders in general, and it's crucial to secure that people understand that the food access will remain despite disruptions like this one due to COVID that can happen in the markets. The business benefits of responsibly sourcing products are very clear. They help us ensuring the quality of the products we want. They help reducing risks in terms of disruption, and they help securing the conditions for the people that are working on the ground producing ingredients and raw materials, as much as for the people that are transforming them in our factories. We believe there are many opportunities coming with sustainable development to increase the benefits for farmers from the communities where the farmers operate, improving livelihoods and financial resilience. And only by improving environmental and financial resilience, we will be sure that we can address crucial systems and systemic systems like the disruptions that we have been confronted with this year.
Thank you, Abreu. Many suggestions come up from your words. We'll go back to that later. You said no one can do this alone. So I would ask Sandrine Dixon Declève how the crisis affected this journey and the 2030 agenda.
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to speak at this very esteemed conference. I'd like to, in particular, thank Enrico Giovanni, who's been such a leader in this area and a member of the Club of Rome. Enrico and myself and many members of the club believe that it is the responsibility of the Club of Rome to remind global decision makers that we have globally wasted 50 years of valuable time. And at this very moment that we have to actually really get an understanding as we move through COVID and embrace transformational systems logic and bring solutions to convergence of what we call the 3 key tipping points at this time. We have the tipping point of a health pandemic, which is part, actually, a reaction to the tipping points of climate change and biodiversity loss. Basically, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the vulnerabilities of health, social, economic, financial, and political systems across the world. And your very key question is, why does this matter? Well, it matters because it has shown that we need to build resilience into our economies that actually reshape the future and make us much stronger so that we can bounce forward. I must say at this time that as countries across the globe should be recovering from the pandemic in a way which truly rebuilds the future, they are collectively wasting recovery money to actually build the old past and the incumbents and prop up an old economy. We know that we have $10,000 billion that have been spent on recovery funds. And only 80% of that money has actually been spent on green and social recovery. Our societies are really trapped in terms of thinking. Only by extending the circle of care to future generations and understanding that actually bouncing forward means protecting our future, not going back to the economy that got us into this mess. An economy which is based on GDP at all costs, consumption at all costs. The fact of the matter is that the Club of Rome already 50 years ago, and that is why it is our collective responsibility now to remind decision makers that we already indicated 50 years ago that we would be moving beyond the planetary boundaries due to continued population growth and the impact on the world as we know it. And therefore, we have to recognize that we are in a planetary emergency now, and that we actually have to solve this problem in this decade of action. Now, our esteemed President of the European Commission, in her State of the Union address last week, influenced by members of the Club of Rome and our thinking, made a very important declaration. She said, a virus 1,000 times smaller than a grain of sand has exposed how delicate life can be. It laid bare the strains of our health systems and the limits of a model that values health above well-being. So we at the Club of Rome are now setting up a transformational economics commission to very much address these issues as we speak, to work with other economists and thought leaders from across the globe to put forward suggestions for key pathways to decision makers during this critical time that will enable us to recover, to reform, and to become more resilient. And we believe that if we're able to move beyond GDP, to build a new economic system that is foundationally built on the values that we hold true, values which during COVID have been brought forward, the value of access to healthcare, the value of access to food, the value and importance of access to water, and of course, the assurance that we will be safe and will continue to have our own livelihoods to depend on. So I will leave it at that in terms of your question. With regard to the opportunities from COVID, we of course very much recognize the pain and suffering that we have seen through COVID and the loss of lives. But we do believe that with brave leadership like the President of the European Commission, that we actually can build a future which is more resilient if we look at new value-driven economics. Thank you very much.
Questo ci riporta anche a...
Thank you. Stay with us. And this takes us back to what Professor Giovannini said at the beginning. Not just protection, but also prevention, preparation to feel all more protected in the future and in the current very heavy crisis. So now I'd like to ask Laurence Toubiana, who was French ambassador for climate change. What is the current situation and what do we need to stay on this path, which should not be interrupted because it helps us protect everybody? We will back with you in a minute, Starace.
So I'm not sure you are hearing me. That's why. Oh. So I wanted to thank you for this invitation and in a very impressive Sustainable Development Festival. And as really thanking Advis and the leadership of Enrico Giovannini for now many years in Italy. It's an unprecedented time, as many, of course, as Sandrine and others have said in the beginning. It's indeed a life in a generation opportunity, maybe more than that even, to address the biggest challenge of our society, from health to climate change and social inequality. And as absolutely, it's an opportunity because I don't think this opportunity will come back very, very soon, and maybe never if we embark on the wrong direction. As we heard from President von der Leyen, what Europe is putting on the table is a vision for the next 30 years. And that's really the best response we can make to COVID. The Green Deal is becoming the compass to guide our domestic choices and our international relations. It's the best and only tool we have to transform our society in a fair and peaceful way while rethinking the role of Europe in the world. And I am really encouraged by the fact that in the midst of the crisis, immediately after the first month of the COVID crisis, most of the European citizens, together with Italians, in this recent survey, we saw that 81% of Italians are the first in Europe to think that the reduction of CO2 emission during the lockdown shows that it is possible to reduce our impact on environment if we really want to. 77% of them are in favor of the Green New Deal, which is the highest score in Europe. And I understand that some of the results of the recent election, are showing that. Interestingly, this is not only what young Italians want, but also 81% of those over 50. So there is a majority of citizens that are saying the Green Deal, the transition to a green and sustainable economy, a resilient one, this is a solution to COVID. And again, I'm very happy to see that the Italians are also the second in Europe. That it's important that companies that are receiving public aid from the state are committed to reduce their CO2 emissions and protect the environment. And finally, again, another 2% of Italians believe that COVID has demonstrated, and in a way that was wonderful introduction we have as a keynote speech in the beginning of this, before this panel, they feel that within their own society, with other countries, is really the best response to this important. And in the same way, Italians don't believe that the current institution will deliver from them. So the government needs still to gain more trust for the people. And I think that this actual government has gained trust because of the management of the COVID. But the best way to be bold and invest without hesitation in the decarbonization of the economy is really to understand the spirit of where the Italian citizens are. And these new data are extraordinary. We'll publish them very, very soon now in Italy and as in many other countries of Europe. But I think that should provide full confidence to decision makers to move ahead with decarbonization at full speed. And Italy's recovery plan is the first and most important test to do so. And there are good news, investing in decarbonization is the most important lever for growth and for being able to lower Italy's future debt level. This is one of the main results of a new report on decarbonization for Italy, which will be published tomorrow and that my foundation has supported. So Italy needs to be prepared and invest in the most promising zero carbon opportunities, in particular renewable energy efficiency, electric mobility. At finance and technology we have today, we need nothing bigger to tackle the next challenge. We need to ensure that we have a plan not only to phase out coal, but also to phase out gas and put an end for the sale of fossil car. This will give the clarity to investors and ensure the private finance flows that are most needed. And again, I want to raise a word of caution in Italy. I know it may look controversial, but investing in new gas today is no longer economic and it's not needed for security of the system. Combination of renewable storage system, grid, and digitalization make it possible to move from coal to clean in a secure way. In particular, in Italy, is one of the richest nations in sun, wind, and high tech. I know that hydrogen will play an important role, but I would not insist too much on that. But it is really the way, and it's very good that it's now shaped up as a European project. France, Germany, Italy, and some others wanted really to invest, and we have to have a collective effort to do that. But again, a list of projects will not be enough. We need to bring the peoples and institutions together. My advice is ask and listen to citizens what they want. and be led by science and change the institution according to the new needs. Majority of citizens in Europe and indeed around the world want faster climate action. In France, the Citizen Commission for the Climate Change was an incredible experience that has shaped the government, business, and cities' action for years to come. Now that the recovery fund is there, most of the zero carbon technology is ready. And government need to provide simple rules for zero carbon investment and set up inclusive processes so that region and cities can have a dialogue on a priority and build their own project. But we can't make decisions behind doors closed. Parliament has to play a key role. But I do think as well, and that will be my last word, I think we need updated scientific advice embedded in the institutional system. The French High Council on Climate or the UK Commission on Climate Change are very useful. They are made up by independent scientists and researchers, and they advise the governments on the best pathway to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. We need to reorganize the government because climate change has to be mainstream, particularly in the energy ministry. And that in France, Spain, and UK, the two ministries have been, in a way, combined. But I would just want to say that Italy shares a big responsibility and big capacity in Europe and the world. You are, Italy, a founding nation of Europe and one of the third biggest member states. You play a unique role to balance interests in Europe and to never giving up the climate ambition. So we need a strong Italy that ensures that the new EU 2030 target of at least 55% by 2030 is adopted by every member state. And I know that Italy diplomacy, Italy capacity will be really important. And again, we need to push the visions and policies of the European Union as the heart of Italy's and Europe diplomatic agenda of 2021. I'm really happy that Italy is chairing the G20 next year. I have enormous hopes of Italian capacity to reshape the agenda in this body, which sometimes is very conservative, and of course that will depend as well of the evolution of the US politics and the result of the US election. But it's so important that Italy, with this capacity to bridge between many countries, be a very innovative and imaginative G20 leader. I think the very cultural identity of Italy in the 21st century will depend on its ability to deliver sustainable development goals. And that could be at the same time the capacity of Italy to outreach to others and be a Green Deal and a sustainable development diplomacy is certainly something that Italy could enormously benefit and contribute to develop in a very innovative way. So thank you for the invitation and the chance to exchange with all of you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Please stay with us. This first set of speakers have repeatedly affirmed terms such as energy, energy-based. Of course, these are key concepts in this transition towards a more sustainable economy, which can have a very important impact on our economic recovery. So I'd like to ask Francesco Storace, this European project, how is it redesigning priorities? Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you very well. All right, let's say this Next Generation EU fund is simply confirming what we had as the main theme of the new Commission, energy transition and the transition of the whole economy towards a sustainable and carbon-free pattern. So let's say there has been an acceleration of an already designed path, and we are just acknowledging what has happened in the world. There are some global trends, and Europe is benefiting from these trends, and very wisely the European Commission, this European Commission, has decided to capitalize and push forward this carbon-free economy approach. A few years ago, we made a study and we submitted our study to the previous European Commission, suggesting that it's possible to be more aggressive on the road to decarbonization if more electric energy was used for vehicles, for heating, for industrial purposes, and already at that time we proved that it is possible to dramatically reduce the carbon footprint in Europe, but also that it could be possible to use energy more efficiently. This is a global trend, and the way I see it, Europe has done very well in focusing on this. Sister really said that we should take into consideration the future of our offsprings, and Giovannini reminded us that European funds are called Next Generation EU funds. So you see there is a main thread linking sustainability. Sustainability is not in the present, but sustainability lives in the future, because only if we take into account only if we take new generations into account, we are able to pursue sustainability. The good thing is that global financial markets are seeking sustainable-based investment. Europe has attracted 50% of investment, sustainable investment, from all over the world. And this is not by chance, because Europe is the global market that pays the greatest attention to sustainability-based factors. And the more we spread this approach, and the more this approach is taken up by politics, the easier it'll be to implement it. When we started our approach a few years ago, and when we joined the Global Compact at our board level, we did so because we realized that we needed indicators for sustainability. And this led us to issue some bonds that are linked to the SDGs. And we had very good financial results. So Mario is right. Sustainability can be interpreted in the right way, and it can be beneficial for economy. It can protect the future of companies and the future of next generations. When Laurence said that decarbonization target for Europe has been increased, we perfectly agree with the number shown in the study she mentioned. We were not surprised. The target is completely viable. I'm sorry, we apologize, but the sound is very bad, very intermittent. And during the Italian presidency of the G20, the topics that Italy raised, people, planet, and prosperity, were very strongly based on sustainability, because Italy is one of the countries that pays a great deal of attention to these topics. Sustainability and circular economy are at the center of our way of doing business. You will see that circularity and sustainability will gain importance over time, because there is an intrinsic advantage in the concept of circularity and sustainability, and these advantages have become clearer and clearer. Therefore, I think that the core message of this festival is so topical. And what Mr. Giovannini said about the decrees issued by the Italian government and the way that can be compared against the SDGs, it has been an ex post exercise, but as he rightly said, that the same exercise could be done ex ante. So it is important to disseminate the contents of sustainability, and only if we do this together we can reach our goals, that is to preserve the planet for those who will come after us. Thank you very much for your time and the opportunity. Thank you very much. Once again, you highlighted the mood of this festival, the urgency. It's time we acted. So now we have all the opportunities to fully capitalize or making the most of what has happened to become stronger. The word fragility was used by von der Leyen a number of times during her speech. In fact, at this stage we are very frail, there is a lot of fragility, but in order to get out of it, we have to focus on all the elements you have mentioned. And since you talked of competitiveness, I'd like to understand, Mario Abreu, how can we focus on best practices as we read in the Agenda 2030?
Thank you very much for the question. So, yes, Sandrine Dixon de Clève mentioned before about the planetary boundaries. We know that we as humankind, we are putting a lot of pressure in our planet. And I'm saying this because when you ask about good practice, I think the business and the government have the responsibility to help engaging consumers and citizens to look for the best possible solution and the best possible practice to be able to address this situation, to be able to address the pressures that are putting on our planet. If I take an example, one of the topics that has come mostly to the attention of media in the last couple of years has been plastic packaging, and this has made a number of companies rethink and rework with their choices of materials, for instance, in regards to plastic packaging, so that they can deliver best practice in the marketplace. We come from a relatively good point, because 75% of the paper packaging we use is either paper or glass, and we have made already a commitment to reach 100% of all the packaging we use will be either recyclable or is going to be reusable or compostable. So we still have a few topics to address, and there are many ways of addressing these topics. And we believe that having consumers involved in looking at these best practice for consumers to be able to make their choices is rather important. The way we're looking at innovation, for instance, looking at new materials with open innovation in mind, the way we are communicating with consumers, because there is not going to be good practice from business only. We have to secure that the consumers, the citizens, will understand what is their role, both in terms of choice and then in terms of, in the case of packaging, what to do with packaging after use. It's important that we partner with the recyclers, with the recovery organizations, with national waste management systems, because none of these solutions are easy. There is not like a one-dimensional choice of what is good and what is bad. The way that environmental and social systems apply, you normally have to strike a deal, a balance, to understand what is the minimum impact that you can produce. So in the case of packaging recyclability, it's not only about the recyclability per se, it's about the economics. It's the economics of collection, the economics of sorting. It's of course the technical thing of finding the right materials. And companies have a responsibility to produce and provide consumers the best possible choices. We can't use sustainability just as a matter of trying to help our own business to grow. It has to be a matter of creating business resilience, and it has to be a matter of empowering consumers to make the right choices. So the good practice that you asked about, I think it's very important that we take the opportunity now that is created by the perhaps bigger interest from citizens, from consumers, in regards to the environment, in regards to social practice, and help consumers make the best possible choices so that we can have the best results for our own planet and our own species.
Concretezza.
Thank you. The Pope said that we must be down to earth, Sister Smerili said. The 2030 agenda was signed in 2015. There is still a decade to go. Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, what about the current priorities, where we are now?
Now is very much talked about the need for a circular economy. And as we look at some of the waste management issues, we need to remember that circular economy goes far beyond waste. A circular economy and a regenerative economy is part of the solution for this decade of action, and clearly part of the 2030 agenda. That actually means that we need to look at circularity in terms of all material use, the way in which we impact our natural resources, and the way in which people engage with the economy. So that is, to some degree, the approach of donut economics proposed by Kate Raworth, where we look at people, planet, and prosperity within a circular perspective in order to ensure that we don't actually impact the planetary boundaries. Now, how do we do that concretely? We have put forward in our planetary emergency plan a series of actions over the next decade that are complementary between circularity, decarbonization, and what we call the human dimension. In order to do this, we need to have policymakers take their decision-making and their policies seriously and totally shift out of a fossil-based economy in the next 5 years. Ensure that we immediately put in place the circular economy policy that we need that will enable industrial players to very much look at the impact of their entire value chain on land, water, and air. But to ensure that this is actually taken by our societies and our communities, we need to bring people into this decision making through citizen assemblies and a much more informed conversation between local authorities, national authorities, with their citizens. We need to explain, why is this important? At a time where COVID is very much impacting our economy, we need to make sure that people understand that this is also about new jobs, a new way of distributing wealth, and at the same time, ensuring more vibrant and resilient communities to future crises. So for me, the 2030 call to action has to already be put in place now. And that is what the planetary emergency plan that we're calling for actually does in practice.
So this brings us back to the first question. Solutions for a resilient and sustainable Europe. Laurence Tubiana. The previous speakers talked about the social economic impact of the crisis. Many jobs were lost in the last couple of months. So how can the economy become structurally prepared to changes, making it stronger, more resilient and sustainable?
Vedete, è normale avere
some technical problems are normal. Technology helps us, but sometimes we have problems to solve. I don't know if Tubiana is hearing us. So the question goes to Francesco Starace. Can you hear me? Okay, loud and clear. Resilience of the system should be interpreted. What type of resilience are we talking about? Resilience to climate events, a major topic because the existing infrastructure, including Europe, was built for a different climate. And as we try to stop climate change, There are problems to solve. Unfortunately, we cannot hear the speaker. His voice goes on and off.
Poi c'è qual è il livello di diseguaglianza nella nostra società? E rispetto al futuro va crescendo o va riducendo?
What about inequalities? Are they rising or declining or decreasing?
Quindi è attenzione i governi europei, spero, l'Unione Europea, che anzi, ridotte, esacerbate da questa.
I hope that European governments will make an effort to reduce inequalities in spite of the pandemic. The European Commission had already defined measures to curb inequalities.
Perché era destinate a lasciare indietro le parti della città che si trovavano parte.
Again, the voice goes on and off. Unfortunately, we cannot hear the speaker. Right.
Ora il tema è stato
Next Generation EU is a project that aims at this. I hope that proportional resources are allocated to measures and policies to curb inequalities. And when I say inequality, I also mean inequality in terms of opportunities, in terms of education. Education is the future.
Per fare un esempio, noi abbiamo un programma che combatte.
For instance, we put together a program against school dropouts, lack of development of opportunities due to school dropouts.
Poi parliamo anche di responsabilità, perché questo forse non c'è la prima volta l'Europa.
Europe, for the first time, needs to find resources on financial markets. A major effort. That's why rules were established if you travel around the world looking for thousands of billions of euros, you must be capable of describing accurately what that money is meant for. So when you say resilience, it's a generic term. It then gains a specific meaning depending on what you're talking about. Resilience can be stress-related, to combat inequalities, and also financial resilience. Here, Europe is in a vantage point relative to the States. and also to China. This is the European strength. So let's improvise. In preparing this meeting, we repeated several times the next generation EU plan. So it's up to us to take care of the future generations, while the younger generation are responsible for being passionate about what is happening. So I put a personal question to you. To what extent, as relatives, siblings, mothers, fathers, sisters, to what extent is it important to get this message across to young people? Ixon Leclerc.
I'm sorry that the translation hasn't worked. And also there's an echo constantly when I'm speaking. So I'm going to try to respond, but can you maybe translate it for me?
Yes, sure. How much is important to involve the new generation in this way, in this new European plan?
Absolutely fundamental. And I think the new generation has indicated that they want to be part of the conversation. If you look at the climate strikes that were led by Greta Thunberg, but so many other young women in particular, but also men of all ages who have been going into the streets and saying that decision makers need to put in place the right systems in order to ensure that they have a future. And that's why I'm indicating that actually, if we work together with the next generation and with all of our communities and communicate to them the benefits of shifting out of fossil energy, as obviously Enel is doing now so well through their own mission, but other companies that are really moving forward, if we're able to show these case studies to people on the ground, that by decarbonizing, by putting in place a circular and regenerative economy, by building up more resilient communities, they will both be happier and healthier. And this is key. So it is our role now to work with the next generation to show them this future in very clear data points and proof points of what can be done, but also what we must collectively work on together.
Yes, we do have the translation in place. The same question goes to you, Mr. Abreu. Can you hear us? Your personal and professional feeling, is that involving the new generations is growing? Because this very much depends on how we talk to them, I think. Can you hear me?
They offer a great opportunity because of their engagement, as Sandrine Dixon-de-Clèves was talking about. I think this is an opportunity for all of us. I believe that what we need to do, and I look for support from the governments as well, is to make the interactions, the systemic interactions related to sustainability more easy to comprehend. Because we see movements, we see climate movements, we see circular packaging movements. All these systems are unfortunately quite complex. The science of sustainability is not an easy one, and I think one role that governments and companies and key opinion leaders need to take is to be able to simplify the language, simplify the conversation, to make what is a complex system that connects the economy, the environment, and the social and governance aspects. Try to make it in the best possible way, something that the next generations will understand better than the previous generations have. It's important to secure that the language used is proper, avoiding greenwashing, avoiding inconsequent messages, so that we don't miss the opportunity created by the engagement of the new generations who really want to make the change. They understand that we have been putting too much pressure on the planet. They understand that it's important for the future that we have a better footprint. And I think with us, we have the responsibility to enable that connection, enable that communication. And I think all of us, business, governments, key opinion leaders, all of us have a responsibility to work on that. And we have to engage as much as possible. I'll give you an example. Here at Ferrero, we have for a number of years now had a program called the Ferrero Farming Values, where we have people on the ground working with farmers um, in the production of the main raw materials we use. In those programs, we interact a lot with families, thousands of families that have a willingness to make things better. And we believe that by working with the younger generation, not only we can prevent problems that we have seen before, but we also can work for more resilience, for better livelihoods. And we see that the younger generation are much more tuned on these aspects than we have seen before. So it's more rewarding as well for the companies to do these activities, to work with the people on the ground, and try to make the systemic change that I believe the planet needs.
Banale, ma voi siete.
I put this question to you because you are in a privileged position to better understand what you see, how you see your responsibility. So, what do you think? How do you see the involvement and responsibility of Enel in this respect?
Beh, chiaramente siamo coinvolti in prima persona, perché
We are in the front line.
la nostra strategia
Our strategy for years now has been placing renewable sources at the core, at the center, progressively closing thermal power stations.
vecchio. È un esercizio difficile perché chiaramente
This is a difficult exercise because you must leave the lights on, as it were, but we have already overcome the no return point, meaning that this trajectory to full decarbonization will be shorter than expected. We took this direction, we took this way a decade ago, 10 years ago. Back then it sounded impossible to achieve full decarbonization. Nonetheless, we went into it, and now we can say we were right. You can do it. You can do it early and in a cost-effective manner.
Lo sforzo però è uno sforzo globale, non è
This is a
soltanto
global effort, though,
costo in Europa, un
not
costo
only in
ma
Europe
è tutto il mondo che
or
muove questa
elsewhere.
situazione.
The entire world
E
is
nel
taking the
caso
same direction. Sorry, the voice went off.
sì, non è proprio fantastico questo collegamento.
Yes, we don't have a very good connection. I'm sorry, Mr. Storace says.
quali l'Europa sta lavorando e dovrà lavorare molto a lungo.
È una delle dimensioni, la transizione verde e la
Yes,
digitalizzazione.
green
Stavo proprio dicendo
transition
questo, le
and
due cose vanno insieme.
digitization. The two things
Perché
go hand
quello che
in
c'è
hand.
dietro questa grande rivoluzione
What
verde
lies
è
behind the
spinto
green
da due fronti.
revolution
Da un lato la
is driven
digitalizzazione
by
è pervasiva in tutta la nostra vita e
digitization,
anche questo,
which is
e
pervasive,
l'altro dal costante miglioramento
and
dei
by the
sistemi
ongoing
materiali.
improvement
E io
of
avevo preso il fatto che queste
materials.
cose diventano migliori, leggeri,
Materials get
resistenti, queste sono
better,
stabili,
lighter, more
e questo
sturdy.
spinge, questa è stata una decisione 12 anni fa, le cose dopo avremmo portato
A decade
a
ago,
realizzare.
we
Quindi siamo
bet
molto
on
contenti che
this.
l'Europa adesso
So we're very happy
più
that Europe is
si
now
sta
taking the same line of action, the same course of action,
bisogna non dimenticare le reti. Bisogna dimenticare sono le reti che collegano
without forgetting
sia dal punto di vista elettrico,
networks,
che va
both
sicuramente
grids,
nelle nostre case, sono quelli che tengono insieme
bringing electricity to our houses and homes,
sono i punti deboli della resilienza.
the weak point of
La
resilience in
seconda
our
sono
case,
le digitali.
and the digital dimension. We are highly committed to digitizing our activities because this is key. So, how can we speed up this process? What is still missing? I'm sorry, the voice goes on and off.
Secondo livello e non si concentra. Perdono il strumento, il punto principale
The key
è
point
quanto spinto i governi europei diventano coscienti della
is European
necessità di
governments becoming aware of the need to focus on two aspects, the transition from fossil fuels to renewable sources and the digital dimension. These are the two key points.
I governi hanno completamente a fuoco
Sandrine Dixon de
queste priorità.
Clèves, do governments understand these priorities?
Prima il professor
We
Giovannini
have
su
70s
su quanto per esempio il percorso dell'elettrificazione
SDGs. Professor Giovannini
siano correnti
talked about these goals in budget plans. What is missing now? At European level, I mean, what is still missing?
So again, I'm sorry, the translation is very difficult. And I have an echo continuously, but I'll try to answer your question. So I don't think we should be naive and think that governments are really implementing the SDGs. The SDGs are a very important framework, but can you turn off the translation in my headset, because then I can't hear myself. Sorry. Okay, so the SDGs are definitely an important milestone in establishing what is important for governments to fundamentally change in order to look at sustainable development as the pillar of the way in which they develop. But the fact is that this has to be translated into clear priorities and shifts within their economic system, their financial system, and the way in which they govern their countries. And this is not happening. Now, there are a few key governments who have actually decided to shift away from GDP growth and the usual growth model into well-being economics. These well-being economic governments, Scotland, Iceland, New Zealand, Finland, Wales, and Costa Rica, with Canada also looking, and I know Italy was also interested, have actually looked at the SDGs and translating the SDGs into key new indicators for real sustainable development and economic development. And so what we need to do is circumvent the desire by governments now in a COVID world to go back to business as usual, which is a very much anchored GDP growth, non-sustainable development model that does not bring well-being to people and does not make them happier or healthier. So to conclude on your key question, because this is very important, the priority today is to convince other governments that the key to resilience is to put in place new indicators for economic development, which are fundamentally based on the SDG thinking, but translated into policy on the ground that shifts our economic and financial systems in the right way, decarbonization being key, circularity being key, regenerative agriculture being key, and the health and well-being of people, planet, and prosperity together.
We are about to close this conversation, this panel session, and would like to close with a key concept that will be with us until the next events that we will hold. A key concept summarizing what we have been discussing this morning. So I would like to go back to Mario Abreu, a way to summarize these ideas.
Summarize. Yeah, sorry, the translation didn't follow you, Gillian. So I think this was a very interesting debate. I don't think we have all the answers, but I like very much the idea that that it's all of us involved in finding a solution and to look into the SDGs not as something that any of us will be able to fulfill and deploy, but all of us understanding how can we really and reasonably contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. And that has to be a societal effort. It has to be the business, the government, has to be the individuals. I think this connects very well the topic in regards to what can the new generations do and what the governments can do. I think the SDGs can paint the picture of all the necessary measures and the necessary areas that all of us need to really focus on and honestly challenge ourselves as individuals, as business, as the financial sector, as the government sector, challenge us all and see how can we best contribute to achieving the SDGs, because as it has been said before, the planetary boundaries, the planetary systems, they have been under pressure. It is our responsibility as business, for instance, to look into the well-being of the people that produce ingredients for us, to look into the well-being of our employees, to look at the sustainability of our products, and the SDGs are a very good background kind of a framework for all of us to use. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here at Ferrero, using the SDGs as a North Star that help us understanding how can we best contribute, considering all the changes that we see, considering that there is more engagement from people, and considering that solutions are always going to be complex, they are interconnected, intertwined, and it's up to us to look at science as a way to guide the decisions that we are taking, and to guide the way we are developing our products and developing our employees.
The take-home message this morning.
che sia appunto di buon auspicio per tutto questo percorso che stiamo facendo tutti insieme.
Riprendere una parte che
I'd
ha
like to go back to
detto
a sentence
Suor Sperilli, che come dice Papa
stated
Francesco, il
before,
bene
as
comune richiede la
Pope
partecipazione
Francis
di
said, the
tutti.
well-being of everybody requires the participation of everybody.
In effetti
As
sembra
a matter of
semplice,
fact,
ma è
it
una delle cose
sounds
difficili
easy, but
che
it's
sia
not.
difficile.
It's very difficult, in fact.
Quello che è incoraggiante è che in
What
questo momento su alcuni temi, forse non tutti,
what I find encouraging
questo
is
concetto sta
that this
diventando
concept
abbastanza
has
chiaro
been
e quindi penso che ci sia una
being
speranza
embraced
che almeno sul
in
tema
some
del
areas.
clima
So
e su
at
alcune
least as far as climate is
definizioni di
concerned,
sviluppo più equo
and
e
also
meno
as
divisivo,
regards a more
questo
equitable
approccio sembra che
development, this
deve essere
approach
dedicato per risolvere queste difficoltà.
will be
Allora non
the
abbiamo
right
fatto,
one.
quindi
The new
abbiamo
normal. We've
cambiato anche
talked
durante
about the new
questi mesi con
normal.
le autorità e salutarsi
The new
diversamente
normal is
con
saying hello in a
immagini
different
abbastanza
way, not to
complicate.
hug, not to
E
kiss
allora
each other. So
l'umanità
let's
serve
hope that the
diciamo
new
stare
normal, as
sempre
you
fuori da
said,
queste
will
tematiche
be
quasi darle per scontato, perché questo significa che poi alla fine le nostre
taking
vite
this
sono
approach.
cambiate,
Our
dobbiamo
lives have
allinearsi a
changed,
questi goal, a questi
and
obiettivi.
we have to
Allora
take
torno
these
a Sandrine Dixon
SDGs
in
into
inglese
account. I go
perché
back
penso
to
che sia
Sandrine
fondamentale a
Dixon.
questo
I don't
punto.
know
We
if you
all
have the
respond
translation or
with,
not.
with a new
Okay, as we'll switch into English then.
Message, so which is your feeling now, a message to end this panel and start again our process now.
My message to the world, to decision makers, to citizens, is this is the opportunity to transform. But we need to transform by design, not by disaster. We will continue to have crises. We will have health pandemics. We will have that impacted as well by crisis of climate change and also biodiversity loss. The convergence of these crises means that we must come together and start to build the financial and the economic system that we need to become more resilient. We have the technological solution. We have the will of many people, as Laurent said, who do not want to go back to business as usual. So let's seize this opportunity. Let's ask our policymakers to have the will to truly lead us into a future that is much more positive and healthy for people and planet.
Fabiana, who was with us to a certain point. I'd like to thank Dixon de Clèves, Abreu, Starace for being with us this morning and for sharing their experience, for helping us in this exchange of ideas. Having so many different experiences with people from different backgrounds is always very useful. Thank you so much for being with us. We apologize for the sound. Sometimes we had some technical glitches, but it was a very good and profitable morning. Thank you very much, and all the best. So we're finished a few minutes in advance. We are all moved for this event, and I'd like to ask Mr. Giovannini, in the light of what we've said, to give us some words. So first of all, thank you very much for chairing this event, and we apologize for some technical glitches. We do understand that there is a very tangible opportunity. We understand that companies, businesses are doing this not because they want to be good, but because it's good for them, it's cost effective for them. It's difficult for people to understand that this is not just a dream, this is possible. And as ASFIS, this is what we are trying to do. But the media should help us to connect the dots, as we often say. RAI has made a major effort, and it can help other parties. We do have other collaborations during this festival. Our course on the Agenda 2030 was attended by many journalists. Now, I might ask myself, how can we tell not just a single success story, but how can we make people understand that there is a real movement, there is a change, this transformation is viable and it is in progress. I think that these topics are often discussed as if they were just separate topics, like our generation, new generations. It hasn't been easy to communicate this continuum. So sometimes the difficulty lies in the fact that we would like to attract people and make them understand that these 17 goals, what we are discussing this morning, is our everyday life. So, in our work as reporters, is not only to find a success story, but to make the story attracting and interesting for everybody. But we have to do it because we want to touch people, because this is our job. Irrespective of the specific paper we write for. But I think that every day writing about examples of sustainability or showing examples of sustainability in our television programs is the key. Is it a problem because of generation gaps? Yes, there is a problem of generational gaps because sometimes there is it's difficult to communicate. There are generations are separate, like in different silos. Before the COVID emergency, we talked about Greta Thunberg and her initiatives, and many young people have followed her. Of course, during the COVID pandemic, this debate
has been neglected for a little bit, but now there is a comeback. Our task is to go there again. We have to get closer to these stories. We have to cover what they're doing. We should not trivialize, what they're doing. We say they're young people, they are just protesting because of climate change, but we should really overcome this difficulty, and we have to cover what they're doing right now. Another point that leads us to introduce the topic of our next conversation, the United Nations. I've seen, yesterday I read The Economist. It published a poll, a survey, suggesting that in Europe, but also in the US, the United Nations are considered as an asset by most people. And we know to what extent supranational organizations such as the European Union suffer from a negative publicity. Sometimes they are not up to people's expectations. Since we are discussing global issues, how can we convey the message that Italy cannot do it on its own? How can we link international politics, international policy to domestic policies and to our daily lives? I think the best way to link all these facets and all these entities is to simplify. We talk to people who on a daily basis have to grapple with their difficulties, which are their priorities, of course. So if we want this debate to be felt and to be interesting for for the general public, we have to simplify the topics. We have to make people understand that the institutions, supranational institutions, are not far away from everyday problems, and they do understand, and that they're working to overcome those problems. Yes, and I think that young people can do a lot. Many initiatives are in place for young people to get closer, to better understand these institutions. Right, another point. Tomorrow there will be Voices on the Future. This initiative, 10 meetings with important people working in Italy, working abroad, and one of the topics that will be discussed is how new technology affects information flows, but also the risks for democracy, fake news, the way in which social media make it easy to convey fake information. And if Italy takes the right decisions, some people would be called to change, organizations would be called to change, or as Carlo Tamburi said in the opening press conference, reaching 50% of carbon reduction means to multiply wind farms and photovoltaic plants by 3 or 4 in Italy. So where are we going to put these plants? The question is. So we will use the not in my backyard philosophy will be very strong, and it'll be very easy to cover disgruntled or unhappy people stories, and perhaps people will not, journalists will not report about those who are happy. So how is it possible
to say that the collective effort can really make the difference. I've covered this topic forever, so we know where we are and we know where we stand. It is clear that this is the right approach for everybody, that this is good for us, this is good for our children, this will be good for next generations. But just like in everything we do, covering those who are not happy with things is part of our work, is a duty we have. But we also cover the stories of those who make the right choices. We usually want to check who is not happy, why that person or that organization is not happy. So we want to convey viewpoints without bias and without trivializing the stories. It's important to cover all viewpoints and we have to double check what we write, especially during this pandemic. We have been overexposed to information, so it is important to mediate. I'm overwhelmed with information, but I have to tell you of information, but I cannot bombard you with information without helping people to understand. They said that on social media we have our friends and we repost what we have on our wall, but the work of reporters is to tell stories and to help people see the best side of those stories. Always checking what we write. All right, just a last question, then we will move on to our next debate. And this has to do with local communities, with communities. We saw this morning that the European Union has asked us to implement the policies for resiliency and recovery to put them together with the actions undertaken with funds from local governments. That's why it's important to combine these resources, and that's why next meeting will be devoted to the topic of communities. And since RAI has a strong role in telling local stories, the stories of local communities, local conflicts, how can RAI enhance its role to tell about new solutions, perhaps new official solutions, a new form of governance at a local level? We've seen with recent elections that there is a link, a connection between the local communities and the charismatic people ruling or leading these local communities. We have at RAI our local offices, and they help tremendously in our daily work. Our local offices, our reference points in telling local stories. It isn't easy because involving communities means that we need to study, we need to understand. And then the local communities will be fundamental to get to a unifying approach. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing the roundtable, but also for these very interesting insights and for the work you do. All right, at this point, let's move on to our last part of the morning session. we go to New York. I'd like to thank Mariangela Zappia, Italian representative at the UN. She is the head of the delegation that will work at the United Nations, and Maria Francesca Spatolisano, who after a long career in the European Commission has taken an important role in the Department for Social and Economic Affairs of the General Secretariat of the United Nations. Good morning. I know it's very early in the morning over there, and thank you so much for being with us. And I welcome you to this part of our festival.
We had to choose when to move the dates, and we selected the date of today because the UN General Assembly celebrates it's a celebration. So we want to understand from you, what do you think about the outcome of the UN General Assembly, if any, and what is happening behind the scenes? Mariangela Zappia. I thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, institutional partner of the festival now. So the festival was promoted by the embassies and the institutes of culture around the world. Ambassador Zappia, you have the floor. Good morning. Indeed, it's dawn here. It's a great pleasure for me to take part in this session along with Maria Francesca. The Festival of Sustainable Development to me expresses what should be done internationally, a collective dialogue, diplomacy, politics, concrete experience, economy, social dimension. This would help international relations, I guess. I thank Enrico Giovannini for the invitation and the passion he puts into this, into the festival. Year after year, the festival is making actual changes. Yesterday, a UN Assembly session was held. Even, commemorations help because they give us the meaning, of these institutions that were erected and established by the international community. E oggi si apre ufficialmente il 75esimo Assemblea Generale. The 75th UN General Assembly will start in a couple of hours. In a way, it's surreal in that rooms are empty. You can only see one delegate per country attending. And there is this feeling of emptiness. diplomacy is at work, and it will be interesting to hear from international diplomats. Fights, alliances, conflicts more often than not take shape in the hallways of the UN building, and we don't have anything like this today. Diplomats generally accompany the national delegations. We want to do this today, so it's a very unique UN assembly. Who would have dared to imagine such an assembly? And we're all called to take up this challenge, but nobody knows how many will be able to take it and accept it. We haven't seen each other in person since March. Nonetheless, dialogue continued on all topics of interest. Indeed, we feel the need more than ever to work together to improve our societies where inequalities are just too many. We need a resilient society, even more so after COVID-19. I could go on and on, but I don't know. Let's hear from the Secretariat.
Tra le due dimensioni, quindi chiederei a Maria Francesca Spatolisano, che appunto
Maria Francesca Spatolisano is Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs. What message the UN Secretariat is conveying? The Secretariat published a report a few days ago. The UN is going through a reform process to face change and help a recovery of multilateralism under attack from many countries. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, for giving me the opportunity to talk. First of all, I'd like to join Mariangela Zappia's words about the festival.
È un esempio lampante di quello che ci serve, cioè creare una cultura dell'impegno per la sostenibilità.
This is a clear-cut example of what we need, a commitment towards sustainability, both in Italy and elsewhere. So for the UN, this is very, very important, having a partnership with others, with the living elements of society that, along with governments, can help us accomplish SDGs. So thank you for what the Alliance is doing, and also thank you for including me in this conversation.
Come hai detto giustamente, il segretario generale ha appena pubblicato
The Secretary General has just published a report that summarizes a number of policy briefings that in the last couple of months we organized to analyze and give an answer to the challenges of the pandemic for the different countries, and of course countries are in different situations and they can answer differently
difficoltà create dal Covid,
to
ma anche questo
COVID
rapporto cerca
problems.
appunto di guardare un
Anyway,
pochino più
this
a lungo
report
termine, nel medio e nel lungo
takes on
periodo, che
a
cosa le nazioni
long-term
unite possono
outlook
fare
to
per
see what the UN can
sostenere
do
l'azione dei
to
governi.
support the governmental
Se
action.
ho un minuto posso brevemente
If
dire
I
appunto
may,
quello che per sommi capi è il contenuto di questo
I can
rapporto.
briefly tell you about the
Innanzitutto la
content of
risposta
this
del
report. First of
sistema
all, the
è una risposta coordinata, e questo
response
già in
from
sé
the
è un
system,
elemento
which is a
importante.
coordinated response, and in itself this is very
Sento
important.
molti rumori nel
I
auricolare,
have,
scusatemi se
I can
possiamo
hear a
chiudere,
noise
grazie.
in the background in my ears.
Dunque la prima cosa dicevo è che la risposta del sistema è coordinata,
So, as I
articolata
said,
in
the
maniera
system
da
is replying in a
sostenersi a vicenda le varie parti delle
coordinated
Nazioni Unite,
manner,
e questo è già di per sé
which
importante,
is
perché
important
l'efficienza in
because
momenti come questi di
efficiency at a
massimizzare
time
le
like
risorse
this,
disponibili è
maximizing the
importante. Le
available
risorse
resources,
disponibili sono
is
poche
very
per fare
important,
tutto quello
and
che ci
resources are
vorrebbe,
scanty
e
to do what we need to do.
vi darò dei dati dopo magari. Dunque, dicevo, il primo punto che l'azione delle Nazioni Unite ha cercato di mettere in pratica è salvare vite. In una pandemia
First of all, the UN tried to
l'emergenza è
save
importante.
lives,
L'emergenza vuol dire raggiungere il numero più
meaning
grande possibile
to
di persone,
reach
soprattutto
out
quelli che
as
vivono
many
in condizioni
people as possible,
disagiate,
particularly those who live
condizioni
in
diciamo meno favorevoli, e qui
disadvantaged
paesi di conflitto che sono già di per sé
condition, countries in conflict,
più complicati,
or
eccetera. Se voi
going
guardate
through other
alle
difficulties. If you
cifre
look
che
at
ci ha
figures,
dato l'Ufficio per l'azione
this
umanitaria,
comes from the
vedrete
Humanitarian
che il
Action
fondo
Office,
che
you will
è
see
stato lanciato per
that
fare queste azioni
the
immediate
fund allocated
ha in realtà ricevuto soltanto il 23%
indeed received
dei
only
finanziamenti che sarebbero
23%
stati
of the
necessari.
funds
Questo nonostante,
that were required.
per esempio, ha
Nonetheless,
raggiunto 730.000
it
lavoratori
reached
del settore sanitario, poi
700,000
ha provvisto l'equipaggio
workers
medico
in the
protettivo,
healthcare sector
oppure
to
ha
provide
aiutato
them with
93
protective
milioni di
equipment. It
bambini a
helped the
continuare in
93
qualche
million
modo ad avere
kids
una scolarità,
keeping
sia pure
going
a
to school, I
distanza.
mean receiving
Ha
an
raggiunto in
education
quegli anni le
online.
persone,
It
60
reached the 1
paesi,
billion people in
dandogli
60 countries,
informazioni
providing them
sull'emergenza
with
sanitaria e
information
così via
about the
discorrendo.
healthcare emergency and so on and so
Il
forth.
secondo punto di questo rapporto è proteggere le società. Cosa vuol dire
The report
proteggere le
also talks
società? Vuol
about
dire
protecting societies,
ricostruire
meaning
dei
that we have
sistemi
to
di protezione
rebuild
sociale dove
social
questi
protection
sono
systems,
stati diciamo stravolti dall'emergenza, o addirittura costruirli ex novo in molti paesi dove questo non esiste, e questi comprendono
they include
misure sia a sostegno dell'economia
measures
che
to help the
dei
economy,
settori della
as
popolazione
well
più
as
sfavoriti, quelli
the
nell'economia
most
informale, le donne che sono
disadvantaged
spesso
groups, the informal economy,
quelle che provvedono i servizi
women
a casa, le
often
persone, alle
take care
famiglie,
of their
e in
homes,
genere le imprese
they
medie e piccole
and also SMEs, because they find it difficult to find to raise funds on the market.
Magari appunto nel secondo giro vediamo altri aspetti, perché quello che è importante, al di là di quello che sta facendo il segretariato e diverse organizzazioni, è che cosa ci possiamo aspettare.
But what matters is what we can expect of this General Assembly: more support, critique, a turning point. This is a very difficult time. There are tensions. Some believe that multilateralism is the way to go. Others would rather go for bilateral agreements. My question also goes to Ambassador Zappia. Italy will lead the G20 in next year, and so Italy will play an important role to support the UN initiatives too. Thanks, Enrico. Big question. This General Assembly the international community has two options: fully integrating the bilateral approach, so no one can solve these challenges on their own,
ma c'è ancora la possibilità che invece ci siano degli scambi di direzione diversa, è un po' un gioco a somma zero, che prima vaccino, chi diceva prima vaccinare
Another big deal is vaccination.
nazionalista, se vogliamo dire. Io credo che siamo un po' di questa decisione si sta per capire, sarà durante questa assemblea generale, ma certamente l'assemblea generale verrà detto da
Sorry, but the voice goes on and off.
Credo che questa assemblea ci darà
This General Assembly
la risposta evidente che ti dà ora unilaterale, ma che
will try to give an answer to those big questions. This is a typical crisis where no one can make it alone on its own. That's why international relations are so important. The architecture that. But do you think that Europe will put forward its proposals?
Devo dire, l'Europa questi mesi di risposte un po' tardive a alcune francamente del sistema pensa al Consiglio di sicurezza.
Sorry, we cannot hear the speaker. We cannot hear the speaker well. The European Union in the last couple of months has shown that working together and being sympathetic with each other, because this affects us all, is the only way to go. Without the EU, we would go nowhere. The EU pushed towards studies to discover and manufacture a vaccine, and a universal vaccine, a very clear example of cooperation. So I don't want to be to praise the EU too much. However, it is a very good example of a community that established its policy and decided to take up challenges and face challenges.
Scandinavia ha fatto un'inarrivabile prospettiva che si chiama Next Generation EU.
And the EU in particular launched the Next Generation EU, meaning that we have to do these things for the future generation.
Queste le tre cose, tutte queste
Francesca,
poi c'è il nuovo.
da questo punto di vista, se vede altri segnali in altre aree del mondo,
Do you identify signs elsewhere where cooperation and coordination
è un po' un caso unico.
are on the rise?
Francesca?
Mi sentite?
Sì, sì.
Sì. Bene, mi piacerebbe rispondere positivamente.
I'd like to answer yes.
Dappertutto
I
vediamo
wish I could say that we see the same
purtroppo non è
approach
così,
elsewhere, but this
perché
is
stiamo
not the case.
facendo
The
questa
EU right
presenza
now
un po' un faro
is
di
a
azione
light at the
coordinata
end
e
of the tunnel in
costituita.
terms of coordinated action.
Però se guardo a quello che è stato detto
Yet,
ieri
if
nella
you consider what they said yesterday during the celebration of the 35th anniversary of the UN, many said that the UN and international cooperation
sono più che mai necessarie.
are
Quindi basandoci su questi
needed more than ever.
che sono stati fatti da capi di Stato e di governo, dobbiamo dire che c'è un
Chiefs of
forte
state and government expressed
a
this
livello politico per il
statement.
multilateralismo.
So, multilateralism is backed by policymakers, but a number of important countries
Questo è
disagree.
una sfida
And that's why this is a challenge. The UN must take this into account. What matters is that governments by themselves are not the only actors on the international scene, as proven by your alliance. Youth, the private sector, foundations, they're all acting. Local governments, cities. These movements can counterbalance situations where the central government is less in favor of multilateralism.
Sempre nell'ambito di questi 75 anni è stata condotta come si dice, una survey, un sondaggio
A survey
e anche lì
was conducted recently,
molto positive,
a large scale survey,
di maggiore efficienza del sistema.
proving that people want the system to be more open and efficient. 4/5 of respondents claimed that it is paramount to keep multilateralism alive because all problems are global. But if I'm not mistaken, no significant decision will be made on governments within shortly. Many have been talking about reforming the veto system at Security Council level, or better harmonizing the powers of different states in the within the UN agencies. But to my understanding, we are nowhere close to major decisions.
Non so se per me
per te, Francesca.
sì? Benissimo. Beh, io credo che si possa dire che questo non è uno sprint, non sono cose che si fanno nell'arco
You don't
di
do
un
this
giorno o di un
overnight.
mese, è un
It takes
processo e
time.
forse è
This
il
is a
momento in cui
process.
questo processo può cominciare davvero. Lo vedremo,
I
non
guess this
sta
is the
né
right
credo.
time
Però
to
sicuramente la
start this process.
consapevolezza che alcuni cambiamenti in
Changes.
un'istituzione come questa sono necessari è abbastanza
I mean, the
chiara.
UN should change,
Dipende
some
però dagli
changes
Stati
are
membri
needed,
questo
but
cambiamento, non dal
it's up to the member
segretariato e
states, not to the
quindi ci
secretariat. So
rimettiamo alla volontà politica della membership.
it's all about, it all boils down to the political will. Back to the G20, Italy.
Ha indicato la sostenibilità, le varie dimensioni della sostenibilità.
Listed the different dimensions of sustainability as important elements of the future G20.
2021 può
2021
anche in funzione magari di cambiamenti politici in alcuni paesi dare una spinta verso una maggiore collaborazione
may push
sui temi della lotta al cambiamento
towards
climatico.
collaboration, for instance,
È stata spostata anche la
climate change.
COP26,
COP26 will take place in Glasgow, and that too is supposed to drive the implementation of the Paris agreements. So the G20 agenda might shift attention towards these topics. What do you think? Or countries will still be focused on economy, on employment, leaving the other topics aside?
Grazie Enrico, se posso due parole su quello che stavi dicendo prima insieme a Francesca Fattorisano sull'architettura. Io penso che siamo, come dicevo in apertura, un po' ad un momento
I
in
believe
cui
that
bisognerà davvero affrontare
it is really necessary to talk about a revision of the architecture of international relations. It's not just about the UN or the Security Council blocked by vetoes. It's about governance, it's about WTO. The multilateral system can keep working if it adapts to the new geopolitical picture. This is an imperative. It's a must.
Importante poi delle relazioni internazionali semplicemente uscire da organizzazioni nelle quali tutti crediamo perché
You cannot afford to lose members
reattive
as it happened because they no longer trust international institutions. So those institutions need to be reformed.
tutto sommato tra i G20 nacque anche
G20 was established in 2008 to respond to the financial crisis of that year. So the initial effort was putting together the main economic players in the search for common solutions. Then G20 changed and evolved because the economy is related with societal issues. We now live in a different world. Next year, the G20 will have to respond to not only to an economic crisis but to a healthcare crisis. So inevitably the G20 will discuss healthcare issues. World Summit on Health Care will take place in Italy. It was announced a few days ago. We'll talk about food distribution chains, how to ensure food safety, climate, sustainability, the green economy, investment in renewable energy sources. These are political topics. But nothing can be done without a strong political will, so there is tension indeed, particularly about solutions. It's about values.
A proposito di valori, siamo in conclusione, vi invito
Speaking of values,
esprimere una vostra valutazione proprio con un sì o un no.
do vote yes or no, because the G20 is likely to discuss the reduction or extinction of debt for countries most hit by the crisis that cannot serve their debt pledges. A moratorium was introduced about interest. The Pope recently called for the cancellation of debt. Now, 22 September 2020. What about your forecasts? Do you think that in 2021 a major step forward will be made in this regard? What about your projections? I hope so. Yes, I hope so. International solidarity would benefit.
Hanno presentato diverse ipotesi, comprese nel quadro delle Nazioni Unite, che possono essere più o meno ampie, ma che tutte puntano nella direzione di una riduzione sostanziale o cancellazione del debito.
The debt will be hugely reduced, to say the least. Of course, we're not talking about all countries, but only some. Mariangela? I agree. I think that the G20 presidency will work along these lines. China is a major creditor. Not only debts. Another topic to address will be, sorry, the voice went off. Sorry, we cannot hear. Okay, thanks to both. An interesting conversation.
Importante, anche se fosse non decisivo, per l'agenda 2030 in questa settimana, in questi giorni di Assemblea Generale delle Nazioni Unite.
UN General Assembly is important also, of course, for the 2030 agenda. Now the meeting is adjourned. See you again at 3:30 p.m. to open a dialogue with two people who are highly familiar with how the media, culture and businesses are facing the challenge of sustainability. Vittorio Colau and Sara Varetto. And then again we'll have a roundtable session with Italian guests dealing with infrastructure and finance. They will end with the Vice President of the Environmental Commission of the Chamber of Deputies, Rossella Muroni, will try to discuss these topics again. Thank you. See you later at 3:30.
Grazie.